Hello, my name is Barbara Kay, and on behalf of my co-host Susan Portnoy and the Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County, I'd like to welcome you to our program, MOSAIC.
Our focus today is a symposium on the Middle East. We'll be back with our special guests and our program after this brief message.
Thousands of community members come together through programs and services provided by Federation and our local partner agencies to create a vibrant and vital community in Palm Beach County. Together, we can ensure a vibrant Jewish future. Federation and you, changing the world together.
It was a shock when my smart, strong husband had a stroke. His mind was agile, but everything else failed him. I didn't see how he could possibly recover. But through patience, skill, and compassion, the caregivers at Morse Life brought him back to himself. They brought him back to me.
Morse Life Short-Term Rehabilitation.
Morse Life Health System, honoring senior living.
When I was young, I went to Jewish summer camp, traveled to Israel, and participated in leadership development groups. Today I'm teaching my children that being part of the Jewish community helps keep our heritage and traditions alive and vibrant, and can be fulfilling, exciting, and fun.
At the age of 90, I started a second career, delivering meals to homebound seniors. Because I'm a senior myself, I know how tough it can get. If somebody is in trouble and needs help, we need to be there for them. As Jews, it's who we are. It's what we do.
When my family needed help, we turned to the Federation, and they were there for us. How good it was for us to know that we are not alone.
Community, like every gift, counts. Together, we can ensure a vibrant Jewish future. Federation and you, changing the world together.
Welcome back to MOSAIC, Matt Levitt.
Thank you.
You are an amazing guy. You're the Stein Counterterrorism and Intelligence Director, and you're also the Froma Wexler Fellow. That's a big job.
It's a mouthful.
For the Washington Institute for Near East Policy.
Right, say that 10 times fast.
You know, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy is really quite something. I mean, it's not something we take lightly. I really think it would be good for our viewers to understand literally what it does.
You know, I've been in and out of government, and every time I leave government, I come back to the Washington Institute, which I think of as my intellectual home. That's because the Washington Institute is a nonpartisan think tank. We're not affiliated with either party. We're just focused on serious research that will lead to smart decision-making about U.S. policy towards the Middle East. Whoever currently or next occupies the White House in this election cycle or any other, we just want there to be smart decision-making on U.S. policy towards the Middle East, and our scholars come from Republican backgrounds, Democratic backgrounds, and every other type of way you could slice the demographics. And so it really is, you know, a 501c3 academic institution with various programs broken down along the lines of U.S. policy towards the Middle East. Turkey, peace process, Iran, I direct our counterterrorism program, energy in Gulf, and a host of others. I find it to be the most natural place for someone who's going out of government and someone like me who's been in Republican and Democratic administrations to go back to, because to me it's not about the politics. It's not about the partisan issues. To me it's about how do we make smart policy towards the Middle East, which at the end of the day is not just about our allies in the Middle East, but as we can see, has a very immediate boomerang effect to life here in the United States.
Yeah, no question. Where are the experts coming from? I mean, what are some of their backgrounds? You had Dennis Ross, definitely was very involved. A number of people like in that quality and that caliber. Where do you get them? And how do they come?
The Yellow Pages.
That's a good. I like that.
Thank
Okay.
you. We have benefited from being able to draw people from a variety of different lines of professional backgrounds. So at one end of the spectrum, we have Dennis Ross, who's been in multiple administrations as the lead negotiator for the peace process, as a senior advisor to the president, and again in Republican and Democratic administrations. And we have other people who came to us with expertise after being reporters. People like myself who worked in counterterrorism in government, people who came straight to us out of academia, people who spent years. We have someone, Andrew Tabler, who's working on Syria policy. He lived for about 8 years in Syria and in Lebanon, and then came to us having that expertise, having been a journalist there and living there on the ground. And so to us, it's not so important exactly what type of credential, but we want people who have established themselves in their field, are speaking from experience, know what they're talking about, can communicate orally and in written form, because we do a lot of different things.
Yeah.
We do media, we do TV.
A lot of media.
A lot of media. This is the best media, but we do other media too. But we speak to universities. Tomorrow I'll be speaking to Palm Beach police. We do a tremendous amount of writing, and we need to be able to get our message out in a variety of different media.
Yeah, what would you speak to the Palm Beach police about, literally?
I should think about that before I take the podium.
I think that's
Thank
a
you
good
for
idea.
this opportunity. No, tomorrow's talk is going to be about the nature of the threat posed to the United States by the Islamic State and other forms of extremism in the wake of terrorist attacks abroad, like Paris, and at home, like San Bernardino.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the American public really understands what ISIS is?
I think that most people understand what they see in the evening news. Most people can't be expected to have a full appreciation of what the Islamic State is. For most people, it came out of nowhere. And in fact, it didn't. It's just the latest name of what used to be called Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or the Islamic State in Iraq. Before that, the Zarqawi network. It has a long history. And it doesn't necessarily have the staying power of the state it claims to be. But it's not going to go away of its own right, and what and how we should do things in the region to constrict its ability to function, and then at home, whether it's here in the United States or in Europe, to make it more difficult for it to recruit people, to radicalize people, and then at the extreme to carry out or to inspire others to carry out attacks. These are different lines of operations that we need to be focused on all at the same time.
Yeah, but people have to be capable of understanding that, and that's what you do. You try to make them aware of the difficulties and how to approach it.
Well, it's like asking people like myself, do I have an appreciation of the latest research in cardiovascular science?
Right.
And I don't, because that's not my field. So this is not a knock at people who aren't as up on these issues as, say, people at the Washington Institute. For those of us who have the luxury or bear the burden of focusing on these issues day in, day out, it's our responsibility to try and explain these issues in a way that is easily grasped, but based on firm research and travel to the region, and so that people can make informed decisions, whether those decisions, by the way, are based related to who they're going to vote for or what policies they want to pursue.
Speaking of that, do you think our president or our administration has a proper handle on how to deal with it?
Well, like I told you, we're a nonpartisan institute, so I'm not going to answer it in a partisan way, but I will tell you this, and that is that I think that there's a lot of things that we need to be doing more of. And I don't think that that's necessarily a partisan statement. I had criticisms of the Bush administration beforehand, and I served in the Bush administration at one point. I do think that in an effort to be careful, we are making mistakes of omission. It's not mistakes of commission. We're not doing things wrong. We are not doing enough. And I fully understand the administration's concern that we don't want to enter a full-fledged new war, and we don't want to be the policemen of the world, and we need to get more of the Middle Eastern Arab states, the Sunni states, more involved, and that's all well and good, but there are still more things we could be doing, and frankly, some of the things that we are now finally doing are things we should have been doing before. And by virtue of moving so slowly, we, by default, did give the Islamic State some space in which to grow and become more of a problem than it would have been had we gotten more involved earlier. And more involved does not mean 500,000 or 50,000 or 20,000 troops on the ground. It's a little bit of a straw man to say that it's either the little bit that we're doing now or a full-fledged massive invasion. In fact, there's a world of policy options that I and my colleagues at the Washington Institute, for example, have been exploring between those two poles.
Yeah, you wrote an op-ed piece on you don't need 50,000 troops to win the war.
I did. It wasn't my title. I had what I thought was a snazzier title, but as it turns out, the editors at Politico, where this piece was published, knew what they were talking about because several senators reached out to the Washington Institute, reached out to me because of this piece, hopefully not just because of the title, to say, okay, well, here are some middle of the ground ideas. Walk us through them as people in both parties, to be clear, are thinking about what more can be done, but it is realistic. I don't think it's realistic, for example, to say we should carpet bomb the Islamic State and pretend that we can do that without hitting civilians on the one hand. And on the other hand, we can't pretend that since we don't want to hurt civilians, there's nothing more we can do.
But what does Europe think about America's approach at this point?
Well, there is no such thing as what does Europe think. Europe is made up of a variety of different nations. But Europe in general right now is much more animated on the subject than they had been to date because of the spate of attacks, the Paris attack, which was successful, and a whole host of attacks that were thwarted targeting Europeans. You have at least a dozen plots in France alone. And you have several other plots, at least a half a dozen in England, several in Germany, and a whole lot more, and beyond the plots themselves. Whereas we in the United States have only had approximately 250 people who have tried to go to Iraq or Syria or have in fact gone, there are thousands in Europe, and many of them are returning. And so the issue of how do you deal with returning foreign terrorist fighters, as we refer to them, and these are people with passports. They're legal residents and or citizens. How do you deal with them? This is something that is literally overwhelming European law enforcement.
Yeah, it's a major challenge. You know, in this overall contrition and contention, where does Israel fit in this?
So the fact is, the Islamic State has no love for Israel. And very recently, they've just kind of joined that bandwagon. The Islamic State structures itself based on provinces, or waliyat in Arabic, and Waliyat Damask, which is the Damascus province, issued a video calling on members to kill Jews wherever they can, and we're going to liberate Jerusalem. But the fact of the matter is, they are not fighting Israel right now. They are fighting fellow Arabs and fellow Muslims in a battle that is within Islam. And they would very much like other people to join their bandwagon and everybody gang up on Israel and, by the way, the rest of the West. But right now, this really is just rhetoric. Now, there are some small Islamic State components on the Syrian Golan, but most of the Syrian Golan is actually held by other groups, some of which actually have ties to Israel in the form of moderate Syrian rebel groups who send their wounded civilians into Israel and get medical treatment, mostly women, children, and some men in Israeli hospitals.
Yeah, I think Israel's more worried about Iran than anything else.
Israeli leaders have made this absolutely clear. Defense Minister Yalon was just here and made it clear again. For Israel, strategically, they fully understand the threat of the Islamic State. And Israel, too, has had Islamic State foreign fighters who have left, certainly from the Gaza Strip under Hamas control, but even from the West Bank and even from Israel. There have been a few dozen Israeli Arabs. There's even been one Jewish Israeli who converted to radical Islam and went to fight. They're fully aware of the threats, and these are around their borders. Islamic State in Sinai to the south, Islamic State in Syria and Lebanon to the north. They're very worried about the stability of Jordan just to their east. But strategically, no terrorist group of any kind presents an existential threat to real states. But Iran, with a potential nuclear program, if not today because of the nuclear deal, then perhaps in 10, 15, 20 years, which in the scope of things is not that far away. And Iran with a tremendous amount of money to invest in its proxies and its efforts to destabilize the region, this is what really has the Israelis concerned.
That's what we have to worry about, because a lot of people are starting to be interested in investing in Iran because it has the potential for creating a lot of money for people.
So
So that's a big concern too.
You're absolutely right. There aren't a lot of places in the world today, given the world economy, where you can invest and get a massive return on your investment, and Iran is one of them. And I know that you saw the piece I had in the Wall Street Journal just a week ago, where I argued Iran remains an investment risk.
That's exactly
Even
right.
if you believe that this is good for business, and from a strictly business investment perspective, it's great for business, the fact of the matter is people should be very, very wary about investing in Iran. Not because they want to do the right thing or because they want to be patriotic, but because Iran has allowed the Revolutionary Guard to get so embedded across the spectrum of the Iranian economy that there's no way that your company, with the best compliance officers and the most formal due diligence in the world, can ever be sure that you're not actually doing business with the still designated, the still outlawed, the still sanctioned Revolutionary Guard Corps. And that is a huge problem. You have no idea with whom you're doing business. And there is a body based in Paris called the Financial Action Task Force. It's a nonpartisan, technocratic body, international group, focused on anti-money laundering and counter-terror financing standards of excellence. And there are only 2 countries in the world for which the Financial Action Task Force has said that its member states, and they recommend everybody else as well, should take proactive countermeasures because these 2 countries do so many financial shenanigans that could undermine our economies. And they are North Korea and Iran.
Well, that's frightening, I have to tell you. I was going to ask you about the book that you wrote, and I think I questioned you on this last time.
We should do it again. We should do it again because it makes for such a great Christmas and Hanukkah present.
Okay, actually, it's an outstanding book. I have to tell you. I want to thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's such
It's
a
always
pleasure.
a pleasure.
Yeah. We're going to have an opportunity to meet with and listen to Lori Bogart, who's a fellow at the Washington Institute. So when we come back, but I love having you here.
And you'll enjoy her. Thank you.
I'm sure I will. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll be back right after this brief message.
Through our partner agency programs in Israel, Federation creates opportunities for at-risk youth, families, and seniors. We also provide emergency assistance to the victims of terrorism. Community, like every gift, counts. Together, we can ensure a vibrant Jewish future. Federation and you, changing the world together.
My wife was the light of my life. Being her caregiver was both a joy and a challenge. I was determined to stick with it, but I needed help. Moore's Life was there. I lost her after a long journey, but now Moore's Life comes to help me. I look forward to seeing them.
Moore's Life Home Healthcare.
Moore's Life Health System, honoring senior living.
Federation and our overseas partners support the resurgence of Jewish life in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. We also provide humanitarian assistance wherever Jews encounter poverty and crisis. Community, like every gift, counts. Together, we can ensure a vibrant Jewish future. Federation and you, changing the world together.
Welcome back, and welcome to you, Lori Plotkin-Bogart, the Barbara K. Family Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Lori, can you tell us about your background?
Sure. It's a bit ironic. I started off studying the Gulf in the late 1990s, looking for an area of the Middle East where there weren't a lot of analysts, but an important area to U.S. policy. And I had the opportunity to live in the Gulf and spend some time learning about the politics and society. And I was looking for a good opportunity where I could hopefully share some valuable insight into this understudied region. Of course, this is before 9/11, before ISIS, and before so many other people began to work on the Gulf. But the more Gulf experts there are in the States, the better for U.S. policy, I think.
But I've heard that you worked for the CIA. What did you do for them?
Yes, I worked for the CIA right during the lead up to the Iraq War and during the start of the Iraq War. I was on the Iraq counterterrorism team. So if you remember, during that period, President Bush and his administration were looking for connections between Saddam and Al-Qaeda. And this is an area that I worked on.
No, very, very interesting. What motivated you to come to the Washington Institute?
Well, I was looking for meaningful analytical work on the Middle East outside the government world. And my experience at the Washington Institute has been just outstanding. I think one of the most exciting aspects of the job is the opportunity to interact and share information with people who look at who study Middle East policy and look at Middle East policy, people from all sectors. So that includes U.S. government policymakers, foreign government representatives, academics from the Middle East and from across the world, honestly, and journalists who are in the horrific war zones that we're most concerned about 24/7. So it's been a really wonderful experience, and I think this kind of broad experience really helps contribute and informs a good analysis and good policy recommendations as well.
And your specific area of specialty there is what?
The GCC states, so that's the 6 states of the Gulf Cooperation Council: Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, and the UAE.
Could you do us a favor? We've all heard of ISIS, it's on everybody's minds, but we are a soundbite nation, and we really don't know what ISIS really is. Could you give us a brief explanation of this terrorist group?
Sure. ISIS is much more than a terrorist group, actually. It's fundamentally a radical Sunni insurgency that seeks to establish a very extreme version of Islam across not only the Middle East, but ultimately across the world. And it employs very brutal, savage tactics to try to spread its rule and to be able to survive in the territory that it occupies.
Are the Gulf states united in fighting against ISIS, or?
The Gulf states want to see ISIS destroyed. They view ISIS as a threat to their own security. ISIS has threatened to take over the territory of all the Gulf countries, and many of the Gulf countries have spent a lot of resources over the past year or two trying to foil ISIS-linked terrorist attacks inside their own countries. So the Gulf states view ISIS as an arch enemy, and the feeling is mutual. ISIS views the Gulf states
But what about the
similarly.
funding that apparently wealthy Arabs in the Gulf states are using to support ISIS? What's the government doing about that? What are the governments doing about that?
Right. I mean, for one, there are a couple theories circulating that Gulf governments fund ISIS. This is not true, but it is true that some Gulf citizens are sending money to ISIS, and it's not a lot. We understand from public opinion polls that support for ISIS in the Gulf states is really minimal. But there are some Gulf states some Gulf citizens who view ISIS as the winning horse to put their money on when it comes to fighting the Assad regime and its Shiite supporters in Syria. And when it comes to, the Gulf states really differ when it comes to cracking down on this terrorist financing inside their own borders. Some of the Gulf states, like Saudi Arabia, have assessed that any linkage between its citizens and ISIS is a threat to its own security. They think that these citizens could potentially collaborate with ISIS against the Saudi state to undermine the state. So the Saudis are cracking down hard on these terrorist financiers.
Is there anything that you think that the United States could do to assist the Gulf states in fighting ISIS, the funding of ISIS?
Well, cooperation on counterterrorism financing issues has been quite good with some states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but it continues to be a challenge with other states, including Qatar. And this is because some of the Gulf countries essentially are concerned about cracking down too hard on the constituencies, important constituencies, that support jihad in Syria. So we have had some success in working with our Gulf allies to get good laws on the books, good counterterrorism financing laws on the books. But when it comes to implementation, it's been a different story for some Gulf states.
We've had issues such as the Iran nuclear situation and ISIS. The Gulf states have been at odds with the United States. What is the tone of the relationship between them and our country right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, the Gulf states are not happy at all with the Iran nuclear deal. They view it as a threat to their own security. They're very concerned about its repercussions and how it will invigorate Iran to step up destabilizing activities in the Arab world. But most of the Gulf leaderships are practical. They're not ideological, and they recognize that the deal is pretty much a fait accompli. And they're doing their best to work with the United States and continue to keep relations on track as much as possible.
What do you feel that the U.S. should do to better foster relations with the Gulf states?
I think it's important for the United States to understand very deeply the security concerns that the Gulf states have about Iran. And I think we can work together, the U.S. and our Gulf allies can work together more strongly and more strategically if we fully recognize what's on, what their top security concerns are.
Do you have any optimism for the future in that region?
Well, I try always to be optimistic. I do think as the horrific security situation in the region unfortunately worsens, we will be able to see, it'll be more clear who our true partners are, and that we can continue to build strategic relations with the best partners there.
Well, I want to thank you for all that you do, and it's been a pleasure for you to sit and chat with us today.
It's my great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Barbara, it's so frightening to really learn what's going on in the Middle East.
You know, something people aren't aware, and thank God that we have people that are aware and are doing something about it. And thank you for being with us as well. Be with us again next week when we have another look into the Jewish world. Goodbye from MOSAIC.